Alright, welcome back. We're at the base camp of Nanga Parbat. Uh, uh, this you can see is the site for the first camp. As far as the climbers is concerned, they uh, chart out a pre-decided route and these pitch camps over these peaks as they move forward. This peak that you see is the site for the camp one, and as they go along, they go around a predetermined route. As far as I can see, I mean, there's no possible route that I can imagine that I would probably be able to climb. As you can see, there's nothing at all that could probably help the climbers reach the peak. And this is not the peak that you see at top. The sun is shining on top of the peak. This is not exactly the peak. These are the silver peaks, the two twin peaks that you see here are named as the silver peaks, and these are also not the top of the Nanga Parbat. The peak is actually somewhere up for the 400 meters from these peaks that you see at the moment. Uh, this is sort of a memorial. I was expecting something like plaques of people having their names, the climbers who lost their lives, and there are dozens and dozens of climbers who have actually lost their lives trying to climb this peak. But all I can see here is just sort of a grave here, which actually isn't really a grave, and none of the plaques that are visible anywhere. Uh, that hut that you see, the log hut, is in fact more of a wooden brick house. It's sort of a makeshift kitchen. The local people tried to build it over in the hut as well, but it got destroyed as the blizzard and the raging storms actually destroyed them. The peak in the distance that you see is the Raikot. It's probably the 17th highest peak in the world, measuring at about 7,900 meters, something like that. The elevation that we are standing here is approximately 4,300 meters. I'm not exactly sure of that. Uh, the first attempt to peak the summit, 1895, when Alfred Mumbrey, a British surveyor and a mountaineer, tried to scale the peak and he lost his life. Some of the porters as well and one of his compatriots also lost their lives. Then there was the First World War, then there was the Second World War, and Europe and America and rest of the world was in complete turmoil, and there wasn't much really going on. So uh, back in 1930s, what happened was Germans started taking particular interest in this part of the world because as far as the Mount Everest was concerned, in 1930s, right after the First World War, the Nazi nationalism was at its peak, and the Mount Everest and much of the Himalayan region in Nepal and India was under British control, and German didn't have really the access to that part of the country. So they decided to concentrate on the westernmost 8,000er on the Himalayan, which was out of bound for the British at that time. Several attempts were made back in 1932, starting from 1932, but none of them were successful. Several climbers lost their lives, several porters, several tour guides, and lots of people lost their lives. And Hermanbuhl, Austrian German, was the first man, in fact, who actually was able to summit the peak back in July 1953. That was the first time anybody in the history of mountain climbing was able to summit the peak without supplementary oxygen, and also he did most of the part completely solo, because by that time already 32 climbers have lost their lives, which is by far the highest number of casualties before the first attempt of any of the 8,000ers in the world. And the climbers were really scared, and what happened was like somewhere near Camp 3 at 7,500 meters, what they experienced was a really bad blizzard, and storm and temperatures were really fierce. They had this frostbite as well, and obviously you can imagine back in 1953 they didn't have this high-tech equipment and chemical toe warmers or things like that. So two of his compatriots, Bull's two compatriots, decided to descend and abandon the expedition, but Bull persisted. He started off from 7,500 meters. Uh, he spent the night in a bivouac, standing uh, on a ridge. There was barely standing space over there, and he had one of his hand clenched into the cracks of the rocks, and he spent that night standing over that ridge, dozing at times. And fortunately for him, the night was a peaceful one. He was able to summit the peak without supplementary oxygen, and was the first climber who did it solo. He lost his life later at the Broad Peak, which is also in Pakistan, and it's one of the 8,000 meters as well. And it is quite relatively easier peak as compared to Nanga Parbat. But like I said, this is what happens uh, uh, when you're counting on luck a lot. Nanga Parbat is one of the deadliest and probably the most difficult of mountains to climb. That's it for now. See you somewhere in Meadows, I guess. All right, take care.